Many of you may recognize this position. It is the T permutation or T perm, and it's what you're going to use primarily for solving the Rubik's Cube blindfolded. You're going to use the T perm to swap this piece with this piece right here. And you'll swap these two corners, but since we're just solving edges right now, and every time we do it they swap just back and forth, it doesn't really matter to us at the moment. So, whenever you have this piece, the piece that goes right here, in the buffer position, and it needs to go right here, then you just do the T permutation, which is RU, R prime, U prime, R prime, F, R2, U prime, R prime, U prime, R, U, R prime, F prime. Just swap those two pieces. And it's as simple as that. So if you were memorizing this position, you would memorize UL, because that's where you're going to go. And the thing about memorization, the people who are fastest at memorization have each spot on this cube labeled with a letter. Like, for example, this position is lettered for me, I. And so I would memorize I for this position. But all that means is that this piece in the buffer position needs to go to this place right here, which is UL. And so you would just memorize UL. But what if the swap looked like this, where this piece was swapped with this piece? Or rather, just this piece needed to go right here. Well, then what you do is simply move this piece up to where you can swap it with your T-perm, like this, and then move it back down. It's that simple. And so for that situation, you would simply memorize FL, which for me is J. And so then we take this idea and we expand it. I see that when I'm memorizing the cube, I see that this piece will need to go here. So I memorize my letter for UL, which is I. But then I see, because in my head I know that when I do the T-perm, this piece will now be in my buffer position in this orientation. I see that that will need to go there. And so I memorize the letter for UL, and then I memorize the letter for FL. So when I do it blindfolded, I don't use this method anymore, but if I did, I would do the algorithm to swap those two, and then know that after UL, there's FL. So I would imagine this FL where it is, move it up to this spot that receives the buffer piece, do the T-perm, and move it back down. Inevitably, you will run into a circumstance like this when you're solving it blindfolded, where you have pieces that are still not going to be solved, which you'll recognize in your memorization by your buffer piece going back into its position, but you still have these edges that are not solved. And so what you'll do in this circumstance is you'll pick any one of these and you'll shoot the buffer piece into that position. And so if I was memorizing this, I would memorize FL, then I'd say that's going to need to go into FR, then that's going to need to go to DF, and that's going to need to go back to FL. And so I just memorized that. And so when I'm doing it blindfolded, if you just had this string of memorizations, you shouldn't notice any difference except that you're going to have FL twice, once to put the buffer position in, once to get it back out. So you'll do FL, move it up, T-perm, back, then you'll know, now I need to do FR, because that's where it goes, and you memorized it that way. So that would be a little D2, L, do your T-perm, undo those setup moves, then you'll know DF, which is right there, which would be D prime L2. And then you'd have your FL again. And it'll be solved. Also, you will run into, very commonly, circumstances like this, where you'll have one piece that's in its correct position, but it's just oriented the wrong way. So what you do here is you memorize, you kind of act as it's a 3 cycle where 3 pieces are swapped. You just memorize this piece and shoot the buffer piece there, and then memorize this piece and shoot the buffer piece there. So you memorize UL and then LU. So you'd have in your mind UL, which is just the T perm, and then you'd have LU. So you'd have to move that up to your buffer position, do the T perm, and then move it back. So I'll do one example solve with you. You would look in your buffer position, see that this piece needs to go to RF, and so you'd memorize RF if you were memorizing it. And you'd look in here, and you'd see that your buffer piece is going to be back in its position. So then you'd want to break into a new 3 cycle. So then you want to break into a new cycle. So you would do your setup move, do the T perm, and then undo the setup moves, and that would be in the correct position. So then you'd want to break into a new 3 cycle, which you could do just by doing a T perm, which would shoot the buffer piece to UL. And so you'd look at that and see that this is going to be, that UL is going to go to LD. So you keep that in your head and memorize LD, which needs to go right here. So you would do your move, do the T perm, and put it back in its spot by undoing the setup moves. So then you would look there, or you'd have so then you would look at the piece here, look down here, and see that that's going to solve that 3 cycle that you broke into. And so you'd need to break into a new one, but you would know that once you go to DF, you're going to go back to UL. So you do DF, and then UL. So then at this point, you would need to break into a new cycle. And so you would have an unsolved edge right here that you could do it to. And if you were memorizing it, you'd see that that would need to go there. And so keep that in your head and do the setup move. And you know that that piece is going to need to go there. And then you need to know that that piece needs to go there, that piece needs to go there, that needs to go there, that needs to go there, and that will need to go back there, solving our cycle. But you get all of that in memorization. And so you just do these setup moves, and for every one that comes your way, you do whatever setup move you need to do to put it in that position, and you do it. I mean, after a certain point, it just kind of gets redundant. And so there you have your solved 3 cycle. But then you'll get to the end and see that you have one piece that's flipped and it needs to be unflipped. So you would shoot your buffer piece into that position and then shoot this piece into the corresponding other oriented position, and it's solved.